The CMA exam is an international qualification and an international certification. And what that means is that the exam is in English. And because it's in English, this means that candidates who grew up not as native speakers of English often have the question as to whether or not the exam is possible for them. And what I want to talk about here is what exactly this means for somebody who is not a native English speaker. There's essentially 4 questions that are most commonly asked, and we'll talk about all of them. The first is this a problem? The second is, what level of English do I need to have in order to be able to pass the exams? The third question is, do I need to take English classes? And the last question is ultimately the most important, and that question is, can I pass the exams even if I'm not a native speaker of English? Well, the first question is this a problem? Is it a problem that you're not a native speaker of English? And the answer is yes, it is. Anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is lying to you. It has to be a problem for you to be taking an exam in a language that is not your native language. But what's interesting is that this isn't really a knowledge problem. What we have is instead what I call a time problem. By the time you take the exam, your knowledge of English will be fine. But what will happen is it will take a few extra seconds for you to read the question and understand the question simply because it's not your native language. And if we add 5 seconds for each question, we have almost 10 minutes of time being added to the exam simply because it takes you a little bit longer to read and understand the question. And if you talk to a lot of people who say they ran out of time, they didn't need another 30 minutes. They needed another 10 minutes, another 5 minutes. And that may be explainable simply from the fact it takes a little bit longer to read the question. So yes, it is a problem. The second question is, what level does somebody need to pass the exam? And usually from a more technical standpoint, people say that you need to be upper intermediate. And one of the difficulties about a classification like that is, what does upper intermediate really mean? And you talk to different people and they give you a different definition of what upper intermediate means. And so when we talk about the level that somebody needs, I always say that it's important that you remember that you don't need to speak. This is not a spoken exam. And for the most part, what you need to be able to do is you need to be able to read the question, understand the question, and then choose the correct answer. There's very little writing. 80% of the exams are multiple choice, where it's just identifying the right question. And the 20% of the exam that are essays and problems, well, those questions very rarely require very large amounts of written English. A lot of times the answer is a list. It's a short answer. It's a few sentences. You're not going to get a question asking you to trace the history of accountancy from Luca Pacioli to the present. And so it's a matter of understanding what it is that you need to be able to do. You need to be able to read the question, understand the question, and then identify the correct answer. Another kind of informal way of answering the question of what level does somebody need to pass the exams, I say that if you can understand me now in this video, your English is sufficient and you will be ready to pass the exams. The third question that people often ask is, do I need to take English classes before I prepare to take the exam? And the answer to that is actually an interesting one. The answer is no, but yes. And what I mean by that is this. No, you don't need to take specific English classes before you start studying. If you've got at least an intermediate level of English, if you can understand English. You don't need to take specific English classes. But, yes, you will be taking the best business English class you can when you are studying for the exam. Preparing for an exam in the foreign language is the best possible business English class that you can take. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One is that when we write the textbook, when I record the videos for the classes, I don't simplify the language. We use all of the proper words and all of the proper terminology that will be used on the exam. Now, if we know that there's a term that you may not understand, we will define it, we'll give another explanation of it, but we use all of the proper words. And what happens then is you learn the words and the terminology that you need to learn to pass the exam. If you take a business English class, you may learn all kinds of words that are connected to the office, are connected to conducting business, but they may not be the words that you need to understand the question about capital budgeting, the question about decision making, the question about internal controls. And so by studying for the exam, you're taking the best English class that you can and the one that is specific to the English that you need to learn. Now the last question that people ask is the most important, and that question is, can you pass the exam if you're not a native English speaker? And the answer to that is, without a doubt, yes, you can. Yes, you can. I have taught people for 12 years who were not native English speakers, and they had a pass rate that is much higher than the world average. So yes, you can pass the exam. We know and understand the issues that you face, and we develop our materials to take that into account to help you. And so if you are committed and dedicated and you use good materials, you can pass the exam. So yes, not being a native English speaker is a little bit more of a challenge. It requires a little bit more of an investment from your time to make certain that you have all of the language knowledge that you need, but you can do it, and I am certain that with the effort that's required, you can pass the exam.